Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward Looney. And you know, one of the great devotions to Mary that I love and that so many people partake in and pray is that of the Rosary. We're in the month of October. It's the month of the Rosary, and that's why we've had a few episodes really speaking to this devotion and helping us, how do we share it with young people? How do we reflect on the glorious mysteries, which happen to be my favorite mysteries of the Rosary? And also, let's talk about your rosary beads themselves. And so today I am speaking with Dr. Helen Hoffner. She has written a book on this very topic called The Rosary Collector's Guide. She's written several other texts, especially to help people to teach the faith. And so grateful that she's joining me now. So thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit like the Rosary Collector's Guide. Why did you want to write this book? As an author myself, I can tell you the story almost behind every book I've written, like A Heart Like Mary's. It was inspired by a spiritual director of mine when I was in the seminary. Meditations After Holy Communion. I wrote it because I was deeply inspired by Father Daniel Lord. I'm looking at writing a new book, and it's really because I've been touched by this person's writings and really want to make them better known. So every book has a story. So why the Rosary Collector's Guide?
Well, I believe it's filling a gap. My mother, who is 96 years old, collected rosaries all her life. And one day she went into a store and she found a rosary that had 7 decades. And of course, most of us are used to traditional 5-decade rosary. And she wondered what that was all about. And she tried investigating. And I was trying to help her with the research. And then after that one trip to an antique store, every birthday, Christmas, Mother's Day, I wanted to give her a book that would help her with her rosary research. And we couldn't find one. There are many beautiful books on rosary prayers and meditations as you're praying the rosary, but nothing that would give what we call an antique roadshow look at rosaries. And what does this crucifix mean? Why does it have a center medal and some don't have a center medal? So we really put our notes from our investigation together into putting this book together, The Rosary Collector's Guide.
Oh, that's marvelous. So you mentioned the 7-decade rosary. So, the interesting question there is that there are 2 different rosaries that are 7 decades, and one of them's not really a decade, but that's what we just commonly call it. But, you have the 7 Sorrows rosary, which is 7 sets of 7 beads. So 49 Hail Marys on the sorrows of Mary's life. Then you have the 7 Joys of Mary, which is 7 decades of 10 Hail Marys. So if you pray that one, you're going to be praying a little longer than the traditional Dominican Rosary because you're going to be praying 70 Hail Marys in total when it comes to the mysteries or the joys of Our Lady. So that rosary she found, was it the sorrowful, what was it, the Rosary of 7 Sorrows or the Franciscan Crown?
It was a Franciscan crown.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Franciscan crown, so it gave us a learning opportunity.
Yeah, most definitely. So, I know for myself and for lots of people, like if you're a Catholic person, your friends, they will, and maybe your friends aren't Catholic, but let's say your friends go to Rome. Well, they might bring you back a rosary from Rome because you're Catholic and that's what Catholics like. They like rosaries. And, I know lots of people that have collections of rosaries. I have bins of rosaries that I've bought when I've traveled all over the world, whether it was in Lourdes or Fatima or, name whatever Marian shrine throughout the world I've been. And then sometimes you just see a rosary and you're like, oh, I really like this rosary. Like there's one lady on Twitter, she makes these rosaries, and I saw one that she was making about the Stella Maris. And so it was a very beautiful bead, a blue bead. She had a Stella Maris medal that she had. And I'm like, oh, if I see this again, I want to buy one, But The fact of the matter is, for me at least, like I carry a rosary in my pocket. So I can tell you, I carry this rosary. I kind of prefer wooden beads myself, just because I find that they're easier to maneuver, and I like having enough space too, so like a wiggle room and whatnot. One of my favorite rosaries that I bought that I'm not using currently because, well, it broke, and that's what happens. But it was a corded rosary bead with wood beads, and I bought them in Lourdes, France. And I loved that rosary so much that I bought like 5 or 6 of them, so that when I would wear one out, I'd be able to pick up another one. So everybody has like a rosary collection, I would think, that from your first communion. I bet some people still have that rosary, or a rosary that belonged to your family, or whatever. In fact, I'm going to get up here, and I have on my bookshelf over here, I just thought of this, but I have this little envelope here. And what's in this little envelope is a rosary. And so you see it there. It's like a purple rosary. And I found this in in my family belongings, like my grandmother's belongings. It says rosary owned by Elizabeth Doyle, mother of Catherine Doyle Kershane, grandmother of Elizabeth Betty Kershane, great grandmother of Nancy Looney. So that would be the great great grandmother of Father Edward Looney. So, you look at a rosary like this and you're like, wow, this is a rosary that, what was it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 generations of people in my family have touched these beads. So there's something marvelous to think about that. So, like, are you a collector? All of that to ask you, are you a collector of rosaries? Do you have a collection of rosary beads and whatnot? And each one has a story? Is that kind of like how you got into this?
Yes, there's my mother's collection is the foundation. And then as I got into adulthood and looking at my own rosaries, some of my favorites are among Pope Francis came to my home city of Philadelphia in 2015. So I have a World Meeting of Families rosary that I look at to remember the events of that. Or I was just fortunate to visit EWTN studios in Alabama and bought a rosary there. So I think there are a lot of special ones that we all take meaning to.
Yeah. And do you find that you rotate them, or is it you normally pray with the one rosary, but you have all these rosaries in one spot?
If I'm really praying for a special intention, maybe there's a rosary that honors a particular saint and I'll use that one. Or that the color strikes me. Sometimes a special intention, you think, I really want to use that rosary.
Yeah, where was I? I was at a shrine. I think it was at the shrine in Champion, Wisconsin. I live not too far from there, so I'm able to go there more frequently than others. And I think for whatever reason that day, the rosary wasn't in my pocket, or something like that. But it was December 3rd. It was the feast of St. Francis Xavier, who happens to be the patron of the Diocese of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And the person that I was speaking with, he had a rosary with St. Francis Xavier. Like, it must have been a diocesan rosary. And he's like, oh, if you need to borrow a rosary, and maybe it was they want me to lead the Divine Mercy. I'm like, oh, my rosary's on my front seat of my car, because maybe I prayed as I was driving out there. And so he's like, well, here, use this. And so I just remember that, what you just said, that there was a special meeting. I'm like, oh, here's St. Francis Xavier right there. It's his feast day. And here I am thumbing the beads connected and associated with him. So yeah, there is a little special meaning, I think, sometimes with that. So with all of these rosaries, you say like your mother's formed the foundation of the collection, and then you've been collecting rosaries. So you're looking at the crucifixes, you're looking at the center pieces as well. Are you doing anything else, or what's the focus of the study?
A lot of times we like to help people identify family rosaries. So you've got the one that your grandparents owned. Sometimes people will bring us one and say, can you give us an idea how old it might be or where it was made? And we help them with things like looking at the center metal first. We find that over the years, a lot of times people would remove a crucifix and use it for various reasons, but it's pretty hard to remove the center metal. So usually you can look at the center metal and that tells you generally the age of the rosary, and you look at the chains near it to see if the center metal looks about the same age as the chain, just to see if anyone maybe had changed things over the years. And then we'll help people with things like looking at the dates. Many rosaries have a miraculous medal for the center. And sometimes antique dealers or even on eBay, they'll say a rosary made in 1830, when every miraculous medal, no matter when it was made, is stamped 1830, when Mary appeared to St. Catherine Labouré.
Ah,
So we'll tell people like, well, the eBay seller probably thought that's what it was, but probably was not made in 1830. So we help people kind of figure out age that way.
oh. Yeah, that's great. So then, in the Rosary Collector's Guide, have you there's a lot of photos I take it in the book where you're kind of just like introducing people to like these are the various crucifixes. So you could have like the San Damiano crucifix, which is associated with Saint Francis. You could have a Benedictine cross, which has a special markings and so forth, and known for protection against evil. So you could have one of the popular crucifixes out there is like John Paul II's cross that was on his crozier. So there are various different crucifixes. So do you kind of explain all the different types of crucifixes then?
That's what we do. We have sections on crucifixes, sections on center medals, sections on types of beads. There's over 200 pictures, and it really kind of helps people look at what's maybe in their family jewelry box, and then go back and say, oh yeah, that's what I have.
Okay. Yeah. What's one of the most unique things you've found as you've been doing this?
When we go to show our rosaries at various churches and shrines, the one that I like to show is a lasso rosary. It's used in weddings. And I like this because many people just have never seen one.
Sure.
It has 2 5-decade rosaries, and during a wedding ceremony, one will be placed around the neck of the bride, one around the groom, and special prayers are said. And then a lot of times after the wedding, at a reception, many of these have a clasp like you have on a necklace. So you take it apart and you give one rosary to the family of the bride, one to the family of the groom to pray for the couple. And I like showing that one because it's just not seen, at least in the eastern part of the country where I live. It's more common, say, Texas, other places like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of different types of rosaries too, like we talked about in terms of the Franciscan and Dominican and Servites, but what I mean here is like sometimes I've seen something called the ladder rosary, for example. Are you familiar with the ladder rosary, where it's kind of just like looks so I think the concept there is like the rosary is kind of one of our keys to heaven, that praying the rosary helps us get to heaven. And is that the ladder we're climbing, the ladder to heaven?
Yeah, climbing the ladder to heaven. And we think about ladder to heaven. And of course, that concept of a ladder to heaven crosses many religions. We do have one of those. I might even have one with me, but yes, we have one of those in our collection.
Okay. Yeah. So there's another rosary that I'm familiar with too, and it's called Job's Tears. What can you tell me about Job's Tears? I've never really understood it. I think it's like it's specific to the bead, right? Is it a flower or something, or?
It's a seed, and I love that one because it said that Mother Teresa, for her personal rosary, carried a rosary made out of Job's tears.
Hmm.
Job's tears is actually a seed, but these kind of seeds in nature have a hole that makes it easy to string. And people would use necklaces and all kinds of jewelry with them. But Mother Teresa had a rosary made out of these Job's tears. And you think that, throughout her lifetime, when she got to be more well known, I'm sure she was given many very elegant rosaries, probably very elegant jewels. But for her personal use, she liked to carry one made out of Job's tears.
Yeah. And I see on that rosary you just held up that the centerpiece is of the Holy Spirit, it looked like. Was there a
Yeah,
dove there?
it is.
Yeah. So obviously, that calls to mind Pentecost, it calls to mind the Holy Spirit, all of these things. So yeah, in terms of the centerpieces, like it's common like to have a saint, right? Like you could maybe have a Saint Therese medal, or like so why is it that we would put a medal of a saint in in the centerpiece of the rosary?
There's been a lot of talks about history. Very early ones didn't have a center medal, but it got to
Okay.
be more common just as medal making was made. And it was just the early rosary makers, especially around Ireland, that would put that part of the rosary to make it special to someone.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and I'm thinking too, like if you go to the shrine of Saint Therese somewhere in the country, having that as the centerpiece is just kind of the tangible reminder, like, oh, this came from this place or whatever too. So maybe that's just a helpful identification piece. So why do you think people are drawn so much to collecting rosaries? You know, having a rosary in a box like I do over there, it should be in the hands of people. Like people should be praying them, but yet here I'm storing them over there. I'm not giving them away. So, um, well, why do we collect rosaries?
I think we're really marveling at the beauty of them. It's the beauty of them, and it's that connection to ancestors. There are so many people who say, my grandmother had this rosary. You've got a great family one there. I think that's just a reminder of things. And I'm thinking about the center medals. In Philadelphia here, we have a high school called St. Hubert's High School for Girls. And we've got a great St. Hubert's rosary with the center medal of St. Hubert. And there's a legend about St. Hubert saving a deer, and the deer was on the rosary. And I love telling the high
Sure.
school girls this whole story about why there's a deer
Yeah.
on the St. Hubert medal.
Well, it's interesting to me that there would be a school for girls dedicated to Saint Hubert, since he's like a hunting saint, so he's more associated with men, right? But you have a girls' school down there. Yeah, I know that in my box of rosaries that's right over there, that a kind lady from Wichita, Kansas, sent me a rosary that has an image of Father Emile Capon, who has a cause for sainthood. And so, kind of as just a way to maybe ask for his intercession, to remind people to pray for his canonization, they have these special rosaries for him. And so she wanted to send me one because she wanted me to have one and to like share about him and to maybe help promote his cause or whatever. So yeah, it's just so interesting how rosaries come our way. Now there is like there is this custom, and I'm sure you've seen it. Most people listening have seen this, but when someone dies, they're buried with a rosary in their hand, and so the family, they have to go about selecting that rosary, and maybe it's very easy. Maybe it's you're like, oh, this is the rosary that mom always prayed with, and so we'll bury her with that. And some people might be like, no, no, we'll buy a rosary. We want to hold on to that one. But maybe if it was one she prayed with so often, you bury it with her. When my grandmother passed away, I had gone to Canada to the shrine of Saint Anne de Beaupuy, well, outside of Quebec City. And so when I went there, I bought my grandma a rosary of St. Anne's. And so that was the rosary, when she passed, I thought it was fitting to bury her with, just because St. Anne, she was a grandparent to Jesus. She is the patron saint of grandparents and such. And so for me, there was meaning or significance in giving the rosary and having her buried with that one. So do you hear stories about people and their choice of burying their loved one with a certain rosary?
And just like you said, I've heard both sides of that. I've heard burying with the rosary because it was so important to that person and you wanted to be with them. I have a good friend who is 10 years old when her mother passed away. And she remembers at the funeral home crying until they gave her mother's rosary back to her. That it
Mm.
was so important that I think her father intended to bury her mother with the rosary, but she wanted it. And she's now about 60 years old and she still has it.
Oh yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, so that's it's just a custom, and uh, I don't know the history of the custom, but if I had to venture a guess, like make an educated guess, I would have to think that since we ask Mary to pray for us at the hour of our death, that in death we cling to the rosary because we were devoted to it, and that was the request. So maybe that's why we do it. I always remember what Our Lady of Fatima told Francisco. And she said to Francisco, "You'll have to pray many rosaries to go to heaven." And like, I always think about that. And I'm like, here's this little boy. He's like, what was he? 15, 14 years old. He was a young boy, and then he has to pray many rosaries. Now, I'm 35, I think. And so, you know, I, like I've committed many more sins than Francisco did. So it's like, how many more rosaries must I have to pray as a result? So yeah, I'm always reminded of what Our Lady said. And so, if you, so yeah, I know we all strive to pray the rosary, hopefully 5 decades a day. Some people will pray more rosaries a day. They pray all 20 mysteries or whatever. But, I think that story of Francisco really inspires us. Maybe, if someone's going to pray the rosary, I could join them. I could pray an extra rosary. It's not going to hurt me. It's only going to do me good.
Yeah, and I think, we're very lucky that Lucia from Fatima actually wrote down everything she remembered. And I love going back through her diary, and you see where she tells you that Mary said that to Francisco. I think that's one of the greatest books ever, Lucia's diary, because you're getting it right from someone who spoke with Mary.
Yeah. Now, why is the rosary important to you? Like, I'm assuming as a collector of the rosaries, you pray the rosary too. So why, as a devotion, is it important?
It does so many things for you, aside from we should pray without thinking of reward, but you find so much peace with the rosary. Some people will say, oh, it's repetitive. Actually, the repetitive part, I think, is really good for us. It kind of focuses our mind. We can think about Mary. It's something that you're joining people around the world doing, and you think of all the miracles associated with the rosary. It just can do so many good things in the world.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, like, and when I pray the rosary, sometimes it's late in the day, sometimes it's while I'm driving, but I'll tell you, when I pray the rosary, and today is a good example of this. So last night, I prayed the rosary. I went for a walk around the neighborhood, prayed it in the evening. It was great. Got my rosary in, right? And then this morning I had to get up, do something at like 6:45 in the church parking lot, send off a group of people. And I'm like, oh, I got like, 45 minutes to bus duty or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll go for my rosary walk this morning now, and I'll get it in, And but there's something different, I think. When I pray my rosary in the morning, there's something different about the day than when I like prolong it and pray it later in the day. Like my day is marked as like you described it, peace, and like there's a great sense of, the fact that I've already asked Mary to pray for me, a sinner, today and at the hour of my death. And I just feel strengthened for the day ahead when I pray it in the morning, actually.
And there's even great medical research that says praying the rosary lowers blood pressure, improves cardiovascular health. So aside from the spiritual benefits, there's actually medical benefits.
Oh, wow. So I've probably heard that, but didn't remember that. So that's great too. So this book that you wrote, you're helping people just to like learn a little bit about the rosaries they might have, help them identify certain aspects. And that's something I get as a priest. Like someone will bring me a rosary and they'll be like, "Hey, Father, can you look at this and what's this about? What does this mean," or whatever. So I think it's great. You have a book out there that people can use. So you mentioned helping people. So I'm assuming maybe people in your circle of friends or your family or your community, they know you do this, and maybe they come to you, seek you out. But do you have a business that you do this? Do you do consultations or anything like that?
Really, we just do writing, and we love to bring our collection to show it at colleges, schools, to show people the rosary. Sometimes people will ask us what we think it's worth, and we'll give an estimate, but not as a business, more like, well, just based on our own experiences.
I see. So you go around and you showcase the rosaries. So you say, this is the rosary collection that we have, and you let people see it.
Yeah, and it's funny. One time we were at the shrine of Padre Pio in Bartow, Pennsylvania, and they had announced on their website that we were going to be there a certain day and showing the rosaries. Family came up to us. Little boy was 10 years old. They lived an hour away, but he asked his parents to bring him because he liked rosaries. And we were just so impressed that a 10-year-old boy wanted to do something like that on a Saturday.
Yeah, wow, that is incredible. It's probably a sign he could have a vocation to the priesthood, right? So,
We hope
um,
so.
yes, there's you talked about the beads. There's lots of different beads out there. So I like praying, as I mentioned, with the wooden beads. We talked about the Job's tears, so it's kind of like a seed that and so forth. Um, there's just normal like glass beads that people can make rosaries, but then you have people that are tying knots and they're making knotted rosaries and such. So what's your take on all the different types of beads out there that people could use as that counting mechanism for the 10 Hail Marys?
Well, I always say you can pray just as sincerely on your Job's tears or your knotted cord as you can on rosaries that are made of diamonds, because there are some out there that are actually made with
Hmm.
diamonds for every bead. But your prayers can be just as sincere on a plastic rosary as one of diamonds. But I think
Yeah.
it's all people kind of in their thoughts.
And there are businesses out there. So, like when my mother died, and if I went over to the cabinet with family pictures in it, I could pull out that rosary. But, I sent off some of the flowers from the funeral, and someone made a rosary from those flowers. So that's a common thing. Is that something you've experienced and you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen people do that. And as you said, you can send flowers and have beads made from the flowers. There's also a business where someone takes actual roses, and every bead is a real rose. And
Hmm.
she's done those for events like a funeral or a wedding.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about that kind of is a reminder to me that, next year on my mother's birthday or on her death anniversary or whatever, like I should pray the rosary using that rosary. That's not something I've intentionally done before. So I should be more mindful of doing something like that. So uh yeah, there's so much we could talk about when it comes to the rosary beads and such. So when people look at the collection that you showcase, and like you had that little boy that came, but what do they say about the rosary collection that you've amassed?
Usually the first thing is they want to tell you about their grandmother, for a special one, like you said, that when it's their mother's birthday, maybe they picked up their mother's rosary.
Sure.
Sometimes they like the more modern ones. Like we have one that's made by the Girelli Rosary Company. It's a 9/11 rosary, where
Oh,
every
sure.
bead is reminiscent of one of the states in the United States. So you get some people who like something that's more recent, like 9/11, who like to
Okay.
kind of think about the members of that, and others like the very antique ones.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. So, I think the biggest takeaway from our conversation is you should have a rosary, and you should pray the rosary, and and maybe switch it up. If you have a dozen rosaries laying around on a shelf, well, maybe pick up a different set of beads and pray those beads and remember where you got the rosary and the story behind it. Maybe just one last thing that came to mind. Sometimes there are wall rosaries. So like they'll hang them up on the wall. And what I've seen often is either they're glow in the dark or they're like chestnuts or something like that. So, do you know anything about that kind of craze or phenomena out there?
Now I've seen those, like you're saying, the glow in the dark ones. Personally, myself, I've been a teacher all my life. I like those when I was teaching kindergarten children, first grade children, because they're usually really big, and you can have a large group of children holding the rosary.
Hmm,
So they're meant to hang on the wall, but they're good for when you're teaching kindergarten, first grade, and you want that big long rosary for everybody to hold a piece of it.
yeah. You know, uh, a few weeks ago, I had on the show an individual who wrote a children's book about the rosary and kind of just sharing the story of the rosary with kids. So, obviously, you as a teacher and you have taught children the rosary. What's some wisdom you can impart for sharing the rosary with, grandchildren in your life or RE kids or whoever they might be?
I think sometimes very young children, maybe you have to start with just one decade. And for a young child, a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, it's going to look kind of overwhelming. So you kind of start small and give them something like the knotted cord rosary that's just a nice soft thing that they can handle. And it makes it very special to have this gift that you give them, but you kind of start small and almost build them up to doing the 5 decades.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. So your book is called The Rosary Collector's Guide. And how can people get a copy of this book?
The easiest way is probably barnesandnoble.com or amazon.com.
Sure.
I
Okay.
ship books, but Amazon's always easy.
So this is just like a curiosity question on my part, I guess. So I noticed that the publication date is January 2014. So we're talking 10 years ago this book came out. So why the press tour now for the 10th anniversary?
The 10th anniversary and just October being the month of the Rosary.
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of the beauty of some of these things is like it's timeless, right? Like, I wrote a Lent book on Mary's apparitions that people have continued to buy over the last 5 Lents that it's been out. So it's, there's always kind of people returning to wanting to learn more. So that's great. I wasn't aware your book was out back in 2014. I would have still been in seminary actually. But now I'm grateful to know that it exists and that it's a resource to help people discover the rosary all the more. So yeah, I'm sure it took a lot of hours to kind of go through and put this book together. So I think you've given the church at large a great service by offering this work.
Oh, thank you. And things like you're saying, like Mary's apparitions and the Rosary, never get outdated.
Yeah, and so do you have a personal website or anything like that, or just go buy the book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble?
Yeah, just that. We do have a blog, Rosary Collector at wordpress.com, or people
Okay.
can email me. I'm a professor at Holy Family in Philadelphia. It's just Hoffner at holyfamily.edu.
Okay. Well, wonderful. If they have questions about their rosaries, they could reach out to you and you probably have a wealth of knowledge about that. So, well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hoffner, for sharing your wisdom and your insights about the rosary today. And hopefully it helps us better appreciate the beads we have in our life. So thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FrEdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.